You've learned a whole bunch of HTML and CSS so far. That gives you a very strong foundation to set up what's called static web pages. Web pages are said to be static, where they don't do a lot of complicated operations within the web page itself. They display stuff really well, they're user friendly, and they're pretty, but they don't do much. These are static web pages and they can be built up mostly using HTML and CSS. But we are living in the age of not just Web 2.0 but even further. What does that mean? It means your page needs to be intelligent. And the way you make your pages intelligent is by using JavaScript. So let's see how JavaScript can help us build intelligent pages. But before we jump into JavaScript, we need to have a slight detour and go down memory lane once again, talking about web browsers and web servers. We've all used web browsers and web servers. It's quite likely that you're watching this lecture on a web browser, if you're not on a mobile device, that is. So you wake up in the morning and you want to read the newspaper. You may be old-fashioned and want to read it on an actual paper, but it's quite likely that you'll open up your favorite web browser, and that can be one of many browsers out there today. There are many good newer versions of browsers which provide you slick interfaces to read your newspaper. So you can choose from Safari, Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Chrome. And then you type in the name of your favorite website. Let's say that you get your news from NewYorkTimes.com. What happens when you open up or fire up your web browser, which is an application on your local machine, and type in NewYorkTimes.com? It's very clear that this newspaper is not available on your local machine, which means you have to reach out to some other place where the contents of the newspaper exists. And your gateway to doing that is the web browser, which you fire up when you sit in front of the computer. The web browser is your gateway to the internet. The internet can be considered to be an interconnected set of machines, all of which can transfer information from one place to another. So the cloud is often used to represent the internet because there's a whole bunch of interconnected machines there which can transfer information from one place to another. At some far end, at the other end of the cloud, you don't exactly know where, lies a server, a web server, which holds the information associated with New York Times. That's the information you want to get to. By the act of typing www.newyorktimes.com, what you've done is fired off a request to get this information from wherever it lives on the internet. This request goes out into the world, into the cloud, which is the interconnected devices, the fibers, the satellites, everything which makes up the interconnectivity of the net, and finally gets to the server which holds the information for NewYorkTimes.com. There's a lot going on in that cloud, but we are not concerned with that right now as a part of this class. You just have to realize that the request originates at your browser when you type in your browser URL and is routed correctly to the server which holds the information for New York Times. This server, having received the request that was originated at your browser, says, yes, I do know what information you're looking for when you ask for the New York Times. Let me send something back to you. Hopefully, that's what you want. So this server sends back a response to your browser. Now, both the server and the browser know how to speak a common language. The request and response is a common language and protocol which they know how to speak. The browser, when it receives the response, knows exactly what it has to display on that page such that you get what you expect. You get the New York Times. So there are different players here. So let's focus on the web browser. The web browser is on your computer. It's on the client side. It's important to remember that the web browser is on your computer and is called client side because JavaScript runs in the web browser. We're going to talk about JavaScript now that runs in the web browser. The web server is a server, just like its name implies. This serves information which the client requires and knows how to read. So these are the two actors in this play, the main actors as far as we are concerned in this class, and the whole thing together is this internet system. Again, this is a highly simplified version, but that's good enough to understand this world of JavaScript. Let's dig a little bit deeper into this request and response because they are very key elements in figuring out what it is that you're going to see on your browser. So what is the request that the browser makes? When you type in New York Times, basically you're asking the server, do you have the information that is connected with the URL www.newyorktimes.com? Is there a server somewhere which can give me this information? Because that's what I want to view. So what is this information that you expect from this URL? What is it? It comprises of, first, text. Those are the newspaper articles that you read or anything that you read on a browser. In addition to text, you also want formatting. You want the text to look a certain way. You want headlines and then you want paragraphs. This is formatting. You, of course, want images. It's very boring to have information without images. You want videos and a whole variety of other things. You might want audio clips, for instance. All of this make up the information that's associated with a certain URL. This request is then routed to the correct server which could possibly contain the information for New York Times. What the server does is hunt for the correct resources which make up this information. It checks whether it has all the resources that it needs to return and then it says, oh yes, here it is, I have it. So what are these resources which make up the information that the web server sends down to the client? The server will say, yes, I found it, and it's in a format that you understand. I have HTML, which makes up the New York Times site. I have CSS, which makes the site look pretty, which presents the site in the way that you've come to expect. In addition, I have JavaScript, which basically allows you to do a bunch of interesting things on the site. And in addition, the server can say, I have images and videos, all of which are associated with the site that you're just typing in. All of these together form the resources which you've requested. The request has come in for text formatting, images, video. Text formatting, etc. is available as a part of your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is available to allow you to perform client-side actions. These are the resources which a web server passes down to the client. Let's quickly go back and understand the definition of a web browser and a web server. Let's start by focusing on the web server. The web server is that logical component which knows how to retrieve the right resources and serve it to anyone who asks for it. So world around, there are a bunch of people asking for the resources associated with New York Times or any request which comes from a client, and a web server knows how to serve these requests to these clients. A web browser, on the other hand, is on your local machine. When it receives these resources from the web server in the form of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, videos, etc., it knows how to interpret and display these resources in the correct way such that it's understood by humans like us. The browser is the technology which allows this, and within the browser technology there is something which knows how to understand HTML, apply CSS, and interpret JavaScript. So, how does the browser know what exactly needs to be displayed when it gets the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? And that's the whole point of the browser. It knows how to interpret the world that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We've seen HTML and CSS in tedious detail so far. What we are now going to look at is JavaScript. And that's what we are going to talk about from here on. We are going to talk about JavaScript. JavaScript is a programming language which is run inside your browser. It's your browser which knows how to understand and run programming language, that is JavaScript. It lets you control the behavior of the web page. So you have how the web page is structured, that's taken care of by HTML. You have how the web page looks, that's taken care of by CSS. But how the web page behaves, what happens when you perform a certain action? For example, if it was your email, what happens visually when you archive an email? All of this is taken care of by JavaScript. An important point here is that JavaScript is a fully blown programming language. It has the word script in it, but it's not just about scripting. It's about programming. It's a full-blown programming language. It's as sophisticated as Java, Python, C#, C++, etc. We don't just build websites today. We actually build full-blown web applications. This means there can be as much code on the client side as there is on the server side, sometimes more. JavaScript powers all of this. It includes objects, inheritance, sophisticated function constructs, and just about anything. So if people say JavaScript is just scripting or it's a toy language, that's completely false. JavaScript is a fully blown language which can do many, many awesome things. So where does JavaScript run? JavaScript runs inside your browser. Your browser has all the information that it needs to run code written in JavaScript. Any additional data that it needs, it knows how to make requests to the server in JavaScript again and gets the response and then process it on the client using JavaScript. Another thing to understand is that JavaScript is interpreted but not compiled by the browser. Programming languages such as Java, C++, C, etc. have two phases before they can be run. They are first compiled into a machine-readable form, and then that machine-readable form is executed. What this means is if there are errors in your code which can be caught at compile time, your code simply won't compile and won't be converted to a machine-readable form. When code is interpreted as JavaScript is, what the browser does is simply reads each line of JavaScript as it sees it and then just executes that line. There is no step which looks at all the JavaScript code and sees whether it's correct. So it's totally possible that the last line of code has an error. What you'll do is you'll end up executing everything till the last line and this fail on the last line. There's nothing which catches it up front that the last line has an error, which is why I won't execute the entire function. That is what interpreted means. The browser executes each line of JavaScript as it encounters it. Browsers interpreting JavaScript make JavaScript a client-side technology. And by client-side, it means it runs on your local machine as opposed to some anonymous servers somewhere on the back end. JavaScript is a client-side technology, though lately there have been server-side applications which use JavaScript, which run JavaScript on the server rather than on the browser. But that's not what we are talking about here as a part of these lectures. So what does JavaScript do? JavaScript controls the behavior of the web page. JavaScript is completely responsible for what happens when you click on something. Does it display another UI element? Or does it hide something? Does it show something? JavaScript governs this kind of behavior. HTML governs the structure of a page. We've seen that in detail. And CSS governs the appearance. The analogy we used was of a human being. If HTML is the skeleton and CSS is the skin of a human being, the skin and the flesh, JavaScript is the brain. JavaScript is what drove Web 2.0, where web pages became so much more interactive, so much more fun. If you think of how a Facebook looks now, and you think about how a Yahoo portal looked back in 97, 98, that is what JavaScript has brought to the browser.